If the Hong Kong legislature passed the extradition law, do you see a high likelihood of the U.S. revoking the U.S.-Hong Kong Policy Act, in which the U.S. agreed to give Hong Kong special economic treatment?
I'm not in the bookmaking business. I will tell you that if the Chinese government effectively coerces the Hong Kong legislature to enable China at will to take people from Hong Kong to the mainland for prosecution and punishment, that would essentially mean the end of autonomy for Hong Kong. And under those circumstances, I believe the United States would have no choice but to terminate the present arrangement under the U.S.-Hong Kong Policy Act. Whether that will be done is another question, but I think that it should be done, and I hope the President will, in fact, invoke that act to penalize China for this draconian and totally anti-democratic measure.
Right now in the U.S., at least in the congressional circle, there's no impediment against revoking this law, right? Even Nancy Pelosi said the U.S. should reassess the trade ties with Hong Kong.
I think there's developed very recently a basically universal view. Now, even Joe Biden has seemingly come around, but virtually every other prominent Democrat that I can think of, and certainly the Republican leadership, and specifically President Trump, has been very forthright about the sorts of things China is doing that are threatening, well, its own people, and certainly its neighbors, and increasingly this country as well. So I think there's far from any impediment to taking this step. There would be a lot of bipartisan encouragement for the President to act in retaliation should China force through this affront to Hong Kong's autonomy.
What do you think Hong Kong will become like if they pass this law?
I was in Hong Kong in 1997 for the surrender. And I must tell you, it was one of the most depressing moments of my life, because it was, well, perfectly obvious what would happen eventually.
Why did you go there?
I went there because I thought it would be an historic moment. I wanted to be there to express solidarity with the people of Hong Kong, who were being essentially surrendered to the Communist Chinese. And it was palpable, the feeling there of the impending doom of Hong Kong as it had come to be in the end, at least, of the colonial period under Britain. Prosperous, for sure, but also free. And so I anticipated then sort of what we're seeing play out now. And so it's not a surprise to me, but it is shocking just the same. And the fact that we've seen really so little pushback on the Chinese for this step to this point, other than by the people of Hong Kong. And I don't know what the exact number was, but whether it's 1 million or something north of that or south of that, it's clear that the people of Hong Kong do not want to further see China essentially garroting what's left of their freedom and sovereignty and autonomy. And I think we should stand firmly with them in that regard.
How would that affect the U.S.-China relations if that law was passed?
If the United States responds, as it should, to this attack on what's left of Hong Kong's autonomy, I think it would further demonstrate that it's no longer the case that China can do whatever it wants, that it can no longer disregard its agreements with us, that it can no longer act in a manner that is, well, bullying of its own people and neighbors and our interests, without there being real costs. And that seems to me to be something that it's past time to begin demonstrating to the Chinese. So in this regard, it would be an important and I think necessary step.
I just feel this might be the last chance for Hong Kong. Do you feel that way?
Yes, as I said, I I felt that the crushing of Hong Kong was always China's plan. And to be honest with you, it's taken a bit longer than I thought it would. And that's a good thing. But I pray that it can be staved off still further. And I think this is interesting because it's coming about in the context, of course, of what Xi Jinping is doing more generally. And I believe that some say he's overplayed his hand, or he's simply shown his hand sooner than he should have. But a lot of people, not just on both sides of the political aisle in this country, but around the world, are now realizing that Xi Jinping aspires to be the empire of the world and to force everyone, willingly or unwillingly, to submit to his diktat. And that is beginning to create resistance. And that resistance should be expressed most immediately on what's really the front line of this struggle, and that's in Hong Kong at the moment. It will almost surely be Taiwan next, perhaps the Philippines, who knows? It's not going to stop with Hong Kong, that's for sure.
The Hong Kong police have already resorted to violence. They've released tear gas and fired rubber bullets. And the footage I wanted to show you is a bunch of riot police run up to this man and totally beat him up with club. And the man was just standing in the middle of the street doing nothing. So do you think it's possible that they will repeat 1989 Tiananmen Square?
I think whether there's a repetition of Tiananmen in Hong Kong will in part depend upon how high China perceives the costs to be. The great tragedy, of course, of Tiananmen is that they took away the lesson that they were not very great costs. Mm-hmm. They ruthlessly suppressed thousands of people who they killed, and apparently quite a number of others who didn't die immediately but did thereafter. And there were essentially no serious consequences for the Chinese Communist Party. If they perceive that will be the case again, I'm certain that the Chinese will ratchet up the violence until it accomplishes the purpose of suppressing any opposition. If, on the other hand, they perceive there are real costs, my guess is they will continue to seek to force the submission of Hong Kong, but use probably more subtle or stealthy means of doing so. But either way, the goal is the same. Make no mistake about it. The Chinese Communist Party is determined to force the people of Hong Kong to submit to its will. And that, again, will be something that I think will have great bearing on what its ambitions are and what its agenda will prove to be beyond Hong Kong, quite far beyond Hong Kong.